What if the day Vienna almost fell, it actually did? What if the Ottoman banners had risen over its shattered walls, and the Habsburg Empire had fled into the West? How different would Europe look today if one siege in 1683 had ended in fire instead of rescue? This is the story of the world that almost existed. On a gray September morning in 1683, the world balanced on a city wall. Vienna was exhausted. The streets stank of smoke, sweat, and fear. Houses near the bastions were nothing but broken frames, their roofs smashed by months of bombardment. Inside the walls, tens of thousands of civilians huddled in cramped rooms, praying the next cannonball would land somewhere else. Above them, the defenders moved like ghosts. Thin, hollow-eyed soldiers in worn coats, loading and firing until their shoulders burned. Engineers crawled through half-collapsed tunnels, listening for the enemy's picks scratching in the dark. Priests walked the ramparts with crucifixes held high, blessing men who might not live to see sunset. And just beyond those walls waited an empire. On the open fields outside Vienna, the full weight of the Ottoman war machine sat like a storm cloud. Thousands of tents, banners marked with crescents, cavalry horses tied in long lines, artillery batteries aimed at the city's weakest points. At their head stood Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa, the man who believed Vienna would be his greatest triumph. For 2 long months, his army had tightened the noose. Trenches crept closer, mines burrowed under the bastions. Each day, more of Vienna's defenses fell silent. Food grew scarce, powder ran low. The stakes went far beyond one city. Vienna was not just a Habsburg capital. It was a gate. Behind it lay the Danube Valley, the patchwork lands of the Holy Roman Empire, and the political heart of Central Europe. If Vienna fell, the road to southern Germany and beyond lay open. If Vienna held, the Ottoman advance would finally meet a wall it could not pass. Far away, kings and princes calculated in whispers. In Rome and Paris, in Krakow and Munich, men asked the same question. Would Christendom lose one of its greatest cities? Or would the Ottomans suffer a defeat that might break their aura of invincibility? In our history, a miracle of timing saved Vienna. A coalition army under the Polish king John III Sobieski climbed the hills above the city and launched a legendary downhill charge. The siege lines shattered, the Ottoman camp collapsed into chaos. Vienna survived, and Europe's story turned in one direction. But this is not that story. Tonight, we step sideways into the world that almost existed. We imagine a single change, a delayed relief army, a faster Ottoman mine, a bastion that collapses just a few hours too soon. What happens if Vienna does not hold? What if the green banners of the Sultan rise over its broken walls and the Habsburgs flee into the West? To understand how that one morning could rewrite centuries, we first need to understand how we reached this cliff edge in the first place, and why Vienna mattered so much to both cross and crescent. To understand what it meant for Vienna to fall, we have to understand what stood behind its walls. On paper, the Holy Roman Empire was colossal. Hundreds of states, from proud kingdoms to tiny bishoprics, all wrapped in a golden title that called itself an empire. In reality, it was a patchwork. princes jealous of each other, free cities guarding their privileges, electors wary of any emperor who grew too strong. At its center stood the Habsburgs, the family that wore the imperial crown more often than anyone else. Vienna was their jewel, their shield, and their stage. From here they ruled not just Austria, but a web of lands stretching into Bohemia, Hungary, and beyond. For friends, Vienna was a court of patronage. For enemies, it was a door that refused to open. To the east, watching that door for centuries, stood another power, the Ottoman Empire. From Constantinople, the sultans ruled a world that arced from the deserts of Arabia to the mountains of Anatolia, across the Balkans and deep into Central Europe. They commanded disciplined janissaries, elite infantry raised from childhood, Sepai cavalry who thundered across plains, siege engineers who had shattered walls from Belgrade to Rhodes. Their map of Europe did not end at Budapest. It pointed straight at Vienna. This was not their first attempt. In 1529, an earlier Ottoman army had stood beneath the same walls. Rain, mud, and disease had broken that campaign. The failure burned in imperial memory. For the Ottomans, Vienna was unfinished business. For the Habsburgs, it was a recurring nightmare. By the late 17th century, the balance had shifted. The Ottomans still commanded vast resources, but cracks were forming. Old enemies had grown cautious. New rivals had appeared. France pushed against Habsburg power in the west. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth watched the frontier nervously. Venice guarded its sea routes. Everyone feared the Ottomans. Nobody wanted to bleed for the Habsburgs. That is why the siege of 1683 was more than a local crisis. It was a stress test for an entire system. If Vienna held, it proved that a divided Christendom could still, somehow, stand against the Sultan. If Vienna fell, it would show every prince and bishop that the old defenses were illusions. When Kara Mustafa marched his army to the city's gates, he brought with him more than soldiers. He carried with him a question that had haunted Europe for 200 years. Would the story of the continent be written in Latin and German, or in Ottoman, Turkish, and Arabic? In our reality, the answer came in the form of a late-arriving relief army, Polish banners on the hills, and a downhill charge that saved the day. In the world we are about to imagine, that answer changes. Every divergence in history starts with a moment where something almost went the other way. At Vienna, 1683, there were many. A signal flare not seen, a tunnel heard too late, a marching column delayed by a flooded road. In our timeline, those moments aligned in Vienna's favor. In this one, they do not. It is the night of September 11th, 1683. Inside Vienna, the defenders are at their limit. Food is scarce, ammunition is precious. Walls that once seemed indestructible now gape with cracks wide enough for a man's arm. The citizens sleep in fits, woken by the dull, constant thunder of Ottoman guns. In the darkness beyond the walls, Ottoman sappers creep forward through trenches. For weeks they have been tunneling, burrowing under the bastions like patient termites, filling chambers with barrels of gunpowder.
In our history, a crucial mine is discovered just in time. The defenders counterdig, flood a tunnel, spoil the charge. In our imagined world, the warning comes minutes too late. At dawn, as a pale light creeps over the battered city, a sound rises from beneath the earth, a muffled rumble that grows into a roar. The ground shudders. A section of bastion, already weakened, heaves upward in a fountain of smoke, brick, and screaming men. A gap yawns where a wall once stood. Not a crack, not a breach to be patched with wagons and desperate bodies, but a wound, wide and raw. Kara Mustafa has been waiting for this. Ottoman drums erupt, trumpets scream. Thousands of janissaries surge forward, shields raised, voices united in a single shout. Ladders slam against broken masonry. Men scramble over splintered beams, tripping on the dead and dying, clawing for a foothold in the city's torn flesh. Inside, officers shout themselves hoarse, trying to form a new line. Garrison troops, Austrian, German, even volunteers from as far as Italy, rush toward the smoke. Artillery pieces are dragged by hand to cover the gap. Priests thrust crucifixes toward the breach, blessing men as they run into the dust. For an hour, the broken wall becomes a doorway to hell. Street by street, courtyard by courtyard, the defense bends. Some of the elite city guards manage to hold a narrow lane, firing point blank into the press of janissaries. But with each wave, the Ottomans gain a few more meters. A garden wall here, a stable yard there, a cluster of houses whose doors are kicked open and turned into firing positions. Then comes the second blow. A second mine detonates under a smaller bastion nearby. That one in our world never quite reached ignition. Rubble fills a dry ditch. More attackers pour in. The defenders are forced to split their forces, desperately trying to plug two open arteries with too few hands. Above all this, a signal that should have been seen is lost in the morning haze. Far away on the Collenberg Heights, the Allied relief army moves slower than history remembers. A bridge collapsed in the night. A column lost an hour finding a crossing. Scouts underestimate how quickly the situation in the city is deteriorating. By the time John III Sobieski's vanguard reaches the final ridge, the smoke over Vienna is not just from siege guns. It is the smoke of buildings burning inside the walls. As the sun reaches its zenith, a white flag appears briefly on a tower, then vanishes in confusion as fighting surges back and forth. Some commanders argue for one last massive sortie. Others plead to negotiate, to save the civilians. In the chaos, one thing becomes clear. The defenders can no longer hold the breaches. By evening, the banner that rises over the inner city is no longer the double-headed eagle of the Habsburgs. It is the green standard of the Sultan. Vienna, for the first time, has fallen. On the hills above, Sobieski's army watches the impossible unfold. The battle they came to fight has been lost before it began. Charging now would mean throwing exhausted men against a victorious army entrenched inside the city they failed to save. The Polish king, who, in our reality, became the savior of Vienna, must now decide how to retreat from its corpse.
News in the 17th century did not travel by radio or wire. It moved in the minds of writers and the whispers of merchants. But some events spread like fire all the same. The fall of Vienna is one of them. Within days, messengers arrive in Prague, Munich, and Krakow, their horses foaming, letters sealed with trembling wax. Within weeks, the story reaches Rome, Paris, and London, each city recasting it in the shape of its own fears. In Rome,
the Pope listens as cardinals describe the disaster. Vienna was more than a fortress. It was a symbol that the frontier could be held. If that symbol is gone, what does that say about the balance of the world? Prayers are ordered in every church. Processions wind through narrow streets, begging heaven for mercy. But the Vatican has no army to send. In Paris, Louis XIV, the Sun King, sits in mirrored halls and calculates. A humbled Habsburg monarchy is good for France. A triumphant Ottoman Empire standing on the Danube? Less so. His advisors argue. Some urge him to form a great league of Christendom. Others, more cynical, suggest that a Europe split between French and Ottoman spheres might suit France very well. In Berlin, the Elector of Brandenburg senses opportunity. If the old emperor cannot defend his own capital, perhaps new powers will rise in the north. Protestant princes, long suspicious of Habsburg Catholic dominance, quietly ask themselves if an Ottoman neighbor might be a lesser evil than an overbearing emperor. In the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, rage and grief mix like storm clouds. Sobieski becomes the man who was willing, but too late. Some blame the Habsburgs for poor coordination. Others blame rival Polish magnates for dragging their feet. The dream of a united Christian defense against the Sultan fractures into recrimination. Among ordinary people, the reaction is simpler: fear. Rumors multiply. Some say the Ottomans will march straight for Bavaria, then into the heart of Germany. Others claim they will swing south, seize Trieste and the Adriatic, choking off trade. Tales of atrocities, many exaggerated, some real, spread in taverns and marketplaces. Inside Vienna itself, life is transformed overnight. The fighting stops, but the occupation begins. Officers carve up the city into districts of control. A new garrison is installed. The surviving Habsburg officials are rounded up. Some are ransomed. Some are quietly executed. Churches are ordered to close until new arrangements are decided. Bells fall silent. The city that had withstood 2 months of siege now faces a more subtle pressure. The long, careful work of turning a conquered city into an Ottoman stronghold. Far to the east, in Constantinople, news of the victory reaches the Sultan. The court erupts in celebration. Poets begin crafting verses about the triumph on the Danube. Imams deliver sermons about the fall of the great fortress of the infidel. Kara Mustafa imagines triumphal arches, gold-threaded banners, and a place in history alongside Mehmed the Conqueror. But victory on this scale is not just glory. It is responsibility. With Vienna in Ottoman hands, the map of Europe has changed. Now every ruler from Versailles to Moscow must decide something new. Do they fight this new reality, try to live with it, or find a way to profit from it?
Empires do not live on battlefields alone. They survive or collapse in the streets of conquered cities. In our altered world, the Ottomans keep Vienna. They do not burn it to the ground or abandon it as an exposed outpost. They decide to transform it into a forward capital, a bulwark of the Sultan on the Danube. The first changes are military. Janissary barracks rise where open squares once stood. The great open esplanades outside the walls become parade grounds and artillery parks. The breached bastions are rebuilt,
not in the old European style, but with Ottoman engineers adding their own touches, turning Vienna's own defenses outward against its former allies. A new governor, the Beylerbey of Vienna, is appointed. He answers directly to Constantinople. The surviving German-speaking population is registered, taxed, and sorted. Those with skills, merchants, artisans, armorers, are encouraged to stay, given protection in exchange for loyalty. Nobles who refuse to swear even nominal obedience are stripped of lands, and if they persist, of their lives. Religious change moves more slowly, but it comes. Some churches are allowed to remain open, especially those of communities willing to cooperate. Others, especially the great symbolic ones, are claimed. St. Stephen's Cathedral, the towering heart of the city, is converted into a mosque. Icons are removed or covered. Crosses taken down from the highest spires, replaced with crescents that catch the morning light. For the people of Vienna, the soundscape of the city shifts. The tolling of bells is joined and sometimes replaced by the call to prayer echoing from newly raised minarets. Markets adapt quickly. Turkish coffee, once a curiosity, becomes a daily habit. Spices from the East, silks from Damascus, and goods from Cairo flood the stalls. A new merchant class emerges: Greeks, Armenians, Jews, and Balkan traders who know how to bridge the worlds of Istanbul and Central Europe. The city's identity begins to change. Children grow up hearing both German and Ottoman Turkish in the streets. Some families convert to Islam, drawn by opportunity or pressured by taxation. Others cling more tightly than ever to their faith, turning homes into private chapels. Administratively, Vienna becomes the anchor of a new Ottoman province. The territory around it, parts of Lower Austria and Western Hungary, are reorganized into sanjaks and timars, land grants to loyal cavalry officers. Castles that once flew Habsburg banners now fly the Sultan's flag. For many peasants, the daily grind of life, plowing, paying taxes, dodging conscription, changes less than one might think. The faces collecting the taxes are different. The language of decrees changes, but hardship feels familiar. Yet, under the surface, something fundamental has shifted. Vienna is no longer the shield of Central Europe. It is the spear point of a different empire. And every year that passes with its crescent still gleaming above the city tells nearby rulers a dangerous story. The Ottomans did not just win a battle. They know how to stay.
For the Habsburgs, the loss of Vienna is not just a humiliation, it is an earthquake. The imperial court flees, first to Graz, then farther west into the safer valleys near Innsbruck. Emperors are supposed to project stability. This one is now guest in his own remaining lands. In the Reichstag, the imperial diet, arguments explode. Some princes argue that full resources must be marshaled to retake Vienna. Others, especially those farther from the frontier, are reluctant. Why should Saxony or the Rhineland bleed for a war that might draw the Ottomans deeper into Germany? Protestant states quietly remember how often Habsburg armies marched not against the Turk, but against them. Old wounds from the 30 Years' War reopen like scars in damp weather. As imperial authority falters, ambitious neighbors move. In the West, France edges into imperial territories along the Rhine, claiming to protect small states while effectively annexing them. In the north, Brandenburg Prussia accelerates its military reforms, building a disciplined standing army and presenting itself as the new protector of German liberties. The Holy Roman Empire, once a loose but resilient framework, begins to look less like a single entity and more like a field of competing powers orbiting a fading sun. The Habsburgs themselves cling to what remains: Bohemia, parts of Styria, scattered strongholds. They style themselves not as emperors by right, but as guardians of a lost capital. Every proclamation is a promise: Vienna will be recovered. Every year that passes without such a recovery makes that promise sound thinner. In Rome, papal diplomats see an opportunity. Perhaps, they argue, this disaster will finally force Europe into that long-dreamed-of unified Christian league. But the politics are too tangled. France does not want a strong Habsburg revival. England worries more about balance of power than holy war. To the east, Russia watches hungrily. An Ottoman Vienna means Ottoman influence closer to Polish and German frontiers. It also means that any future eastward expansion of Russia will eventually collide with the Sultan's sphere. Alliances flicker and shift like candle flames. In this fractured landscape, the words Holy Roman Empire remain on documents and seals, but the idea of a single empire defending Central Europe has been mortally wounded. The fall of Vienna did not just put a crescent over one city, it cracked the foundation of an entire medieval order.
Great conquests are rarely permanent. They invite resistance like a wound invites infection. In the decades after Vienna's fall, the border between Ottoman Europe and the rest of the continent hardens into a long frontier war. Not a single titanic clash, but a grinding struggle of raids, sieges, and shifting alliances. Along the Danube, new fortresses rise, some bearing French cannon paid for with gold, others manned by local militias sworn to the Habsburgs or to Prussia. Marshes are drained, roads improved, rivers patrolled. Warfare becomes less a series of heroic charges and more a contest of logistics, engineers, and gunpowder. Underground, something else is changing. Bands of irregular fighters, Christian and Muslim alike, learn to exploit the cracks between the big powers. In the hills of Hungary and Croatia, insurgents strike at Ottoman supply lines, ambush small garrisons, and then vanish into forests. Some fight for faith, others for revenge, many simply for the chance to grab what they can in a world where borders mean less and weapons mean more. The Ottomans respond with harsh reprisals, but they are now stretched across an even wider front. Holding Buda, Belgrade, and Vienna at once demands troops and money. The empire must choose: tighten its grip in the Balkans or fully integrate its new Austrian lands. It tries to do both and begins to feel the strain. On the other side, new doctrines arise. Military thinkers in Berlin, Paris, and Stockholm study the Ottoman success at Vienna and swear it will never be repeated. They invest in star-shaped fortresses, better artillery drilling, and permanent professional armies instead of temporary feudal levies. The old knightly charge, already fading, becomes a relic. A strange arms race develops. Ottoman commanders refine their siege techniques, learning from each new campaign. European engineers refine their defenses, creating layered fortification systems that trade open fields for kill zones and interlocking fire. The Danube frontier becomes a deadly classroom where both sides adapt or die. Over time, something else appears, a grudging respect. Captured officers are sometimes ransomed rather than killed. Treaties allow for prisoner exchanges. On quiet nights, across narrow rivers, soldiers of both sides can hear each other's songs. Yet, under the etiquette and the evolving rules of war, the core reality remains. Every ruler in Europe must now shape policy around a simple fact. There is an Ottoman Vienna, and it is not going away.
What does a city look like after a century under a different flag? Walk with me through our imagined Vienna of the 18th century. The outline of the city is familiar: walls, gates, the curve of the river. But the skyline has changed. Minarets stitch the horizon, rising beside old steeples. The great cathedral-turned-mosque dominates the center. Its once Gothic interior softened by carpets, lamps, and geometric patterns. Christian art survives inside chapels, dimmed but not erased. In the markets, the languages blur. You hear German, but laced with Turkish loanwords. You hear Serbian, Greek, Hungarian, Armenian, all trading, bargaining, arguing over prices. Coffee houses buzz with conversations about poetry, politics, and rumors from both Constantinople and Paris. Ottoman administrators in embroidered coats walk beside burghers in sober European dress. Some families have split along religious lines. One brother converting for career, another remaining Christian and making a living as a broker between communities. Music spills from open windows. The lilt of Central European folk songs is threaded with melodic modes brought from Anatolia and Arabia. New instruments appear. A local composer experiments, blending marching rhythms from Janissary bands with courtly European styles. In our world, echoes of this would appear as Turkish fashion in classical music. Here, it is deeper, baked into the city's own sound. Does such a Vienna feel occupied or simply changed? For some, especially older generations, the sight of the crescent over their city will never feel normal. They tell grandchildren stories of the time before, of emperors and Holy Roman diets, of processions that no longer take place. For those born after the conquest, life simply is this way. The governor's palace is Ottoman. The official courts speak Turkish. But opportunity exists for those who can move between worlds. A new hybrid elite emerges. Families who send one son to study law in Constantinople and another to study engineering in Berlin. They understand that trade and knowledge now flow in multiple directions. Of course, beneath this seeming cosmopolitanism, resentments simmer. Heavy taxation to fund distant wars. Periodic crackdowns when some priest or preacher is accused of stirring rebellion. Secret societies whisper of a great uprising that will restore Vienna to Christendom. A city is never just buildings, it is memory. In this Islamic Vienna, two memories coexist. One of Habsburg emperors, one of Ottoman governors. Every stone street carries the weight of both. And someday, those competing memories will collide with new forces rising beyond the city's walls.
History does not stop at the early modern age.
The shock waves from Vienna's fall keep rippling forward into the centuries we think we know best. Without Vienna as a Habsburg capital, there is no Austro-Hungarian Empire in the form we recognize. No dual monarchy stretching from Prague to Sarajevo. The political map of Central Europe rearranges itself. Prussia grows faster, filling the power vacuum in the German lands. It becomes the core around which a different kind of German unity could form, one that looks north and west rather than toward a lost Austrian capital. In the Balkans, Ottoman control is both stronger and more exposed. Europe's nationalist movements still arise, Serbs, Greeks, Hungarians, Czechs, but they now define themselves not only against the Sultan, but against the idea that the heart of Europe itself is under foreign rule. The 19th century's age of revolutions still comes, but with twists. Liberal thinkers in Paris and London look east and see not just oppressed colonies, but an imperial Vienna under Islamic law. Some make common cause with Christian nationalists there. Others see an opportunity to weaken both Ottoman and traditional monarchies at once. The assassination that, in our timeline, lit the fuse of World War I, the killing of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo, never happens. There is no Austro-Hungarian Archduke to target. But tensions do not vanish. They simply find new shapes. Perhaps, instead of Balkan nationalists killing a Habsburg prince, we see an attempted assassination of an Ottoman governor in Vienna itself, an act that draws the Sultan into confrontation with a brittle alliance of European powers. Without a central Habsburg Empire, alliances before a great war look different. Maybe the main fault line is not between a German-Austrian bloc and Russia, France, and Britain, but between an Ottoman-French accommodation facing off against a Prussian-Russian understanding, each courting Britain and the smaller states. Industrialization changes the scale of everything. Railways run not just from Berlin to Paris, but from Berlin to an Ottoman-held Vienna and onward to Constantinople. Trade booms, but so does the speed at which armies can move. When a general European war finally comes, and with so many rivalries, it is hard to imagine that it would not. It unfolds across a different map. Trenches might scar the plains of Hungary and the approaches to Vienna, as much as the fields of Flanders. After such a war, what rises? Maybe a shattered Ottoman Empire retreats from its European capital, leaving behind a power vacuum that local nationalists and foreign powers scramble to fill. Perhaps an independent Danubian republic emerges in Vienna, claiming both Christian and Muslim heritage, a fragile attempt at multi-ethnic coexistence. Or perhaps, in the chaos, a radical movement takes root there, blending European ideologies with grievances from centuries of being a frontier city under distant rulers. Whatever the details, one thing is clear. If Vienna had fallen and stayed under Ottoman control, the familiar story of modern Europe, Habsburg empires, Sarajevo assassinations, the exact alignments of world wars would be unrecognizable. Our own timeline begins to look less inevitable and more like what it truly is, one fragile path among many that could have been.
We have walked through an unreal world, a Europe where Vienna fell, the Holy Roman Empire cracked wide open, and an Ottoman crescent shone over the Danube for generations. Now it is time to come home. In our history, the siege of 1683 ended very differently. The mines under the walls did terrible damage, but the defenders held just long enough. The Allied army under John III Sobieski did not arrive to see a fallen city, but a city on the brink. In a single afternoon, a massive downhill cavalry charge smashed into the Ottoman flank. Sobieski himself led the Polish winged hussars, their lances lowered, their horses thundering down the slopes above Vienna. The siege lines collapsed. Kara Mustafa's grand army, which had once seemed poised to reshape Europe, dissolved into retreat. The green banners did not rise over Vienna's inner city. The double-headed eagle remained. Kara Mustafa was later executed in Constantinople, blamed for overreach and failure. The Ottomans would fight many more wars in Europe, but the myth of their unstoppable advance was broken. For the Habsburgs, Vienna's survival became a founding legend, proof that they were, as they like to say, the shield of Christendom. Yet the exercise we've just walked through is more than a parlor game. It reveals something uncomfortable and important. So much of what we take for granted, our maps, our alliances, the very list of great powers we learn in school, rests on moments where history almost went another way. A delayed messenger, a misread signal, a general choosing one hill over another. If a mine under Vienna's walls had exploded a little more perfectly, if Sobieski's army had been delayed by one more day of rain, if panic inside the city had led to a different decision at the breach, then a different story would shape the world you and I live in. That is the real lesson of Vienna. Not just about Ottomans and Habsburgs, but about empires in general. They look eternal while they stand. They seem inevitable when described in textbooks. But under the surface, they are always balancing on choices, accidents, and fragile human decisions. Tonight, we imagined one of those choices turning the other way. So the next time you see a map or hear someone speak of the way history goes, remember how easily it might have gone differently.
History isn't just dates and names. It's blood, ambition, betrayal, and glory. It's the story of empires that rose from nothing and fell into dust, sometimes because of a single day, a single decision, a single city like Vienna. If you want to keep diving into these cinematic tales of power, what-if scenarios, and the forgotten turning points that could have rewritten our world, subscribe to Empires Untold. We drop new history documentaries every week, exploring the battles, rulers, and civilizations that textbooks barely mention. But here's the truth. Channels like this only survive with your support. Every like tells the algorithm to show these stories to more people. Every comment helps build a community of history lovers. Every share brings someone new into the journey. And if you want to push this even further, to help us create even more advanced, in-depth content, you can support the channel via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the description. It's a small gesture that makes a huge difference to what we're able to create. The empires we talk about are gone, but their lessons don't have to be. Hit subscribe, join the legion of viewers keeping these stories alive, and we'll see you in the next chapter of Empires Untold.